Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take a stack of dense sources, strip away the jargon, and deliver the most profound, surprising nuggets of knowledge about the world's most enduring puzzles. Today, we are staring down what are essentially history's ultimate cold cases.
That's a great way to put it. I mean, you think of monuments as symbols of clarity, right? Proof of human achievement. But the four structures we're looking at today are really monuments to silence. They're just giant, unreadable historical documents left behind by brilliant people whose ingenuity we simply can't fully replicate or understand.
And our mission here is to go way beyond the postcard images. We're examining a selection of sources detailing four monumental enigmas. They're scattered across time, across geography, and we're asking, what specific facts make these mysteries so beautiful and so, resiliently unsolved? It's a deep dive into human limits, cosmic connections, political cunning, and the catastrophic fragility of knowledge itself.
And we've assembled a really diverse lineup, geographically and chronologically. We're going to start with the walking stones on a remote volcanic speck in the Pacific, then we'll jump to the political theater of the Roman Nile, then all the way across to the astronomical Earth Serpent of prehistoric Ohio, and finally, we confront the monument that doesn't physically exist anymore, the ultimate tragedy of the Library of Alexandria.
Get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about the past. This is the deep dive into the walking giants, the sacred gateway, the Earth calendar, and the murder of knowledge. All right, let's begin on Rapa Nui, Easter Island. And when you just look at its geographical location on a map, it is the definition of extreme isolation.
It really is a tiny triangular speck of volcanic rock. It's one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, thousands of miles from any major landmass.
And yet sitting right there, staring inland, are nearly 900 of these colossal stone faces, the Moai.
The time frame alone suggests this immense level of human organization. These figures were carved between 1400 and 1650 CE, which is, relatively late in world history. But the logistics of their creation, especially given the island's constraints, are what truly baffle modern science.
Staggering is the only word for it. We're talking about colossal monolithic figures, some of them reaching up to 82 tons. That's about the weight of a fully loaded passenger jet. And they have these distinctive features, right? The elongated ears, the powerful brows, and this incredible, often really melancholy gaze.
And what often gets overlooked is the spatial detail. Hundreds are, yes, standing upright on those ceremonial platforms, the ahu. That process itself would have required engineering brilliance, just lifting dozens of tons into place. But the hundreds more that lie abandoned, either in the quarries or along the ancient transport roads, they tell a story of some kind of sudden catastrophe. They look exactly like you said earlier, like the builders just stopped mid-sentence and dropped their tools.
Okay, let's unpack the central $82 million question. How did they move them? The Rapa Nui people had none of the tools we consider essential for heavy lifting. No metal, no wheels, and crucially, no large draft animals.
None. They were moving objects heavier than most modern forklifts are even rated for, across miles of really rugged volcanic terrain. This is the ultimate physical puzzle.
So it's where archaeology becomes, experimental theater.
Yeah.
For decades, the dominant theory revolved around the idea of wooden rollers, right? Ropes and teams of hundreds of men.
Exactly. And that theory heavily supported the subsequent ecological collapse narrative. The argument was that the islanders systematically deforested the entire island just to get the logs to move their statues, and that was their downfall.
But that roller theory has massive mechanical problems. Just think about it. If you put an 82-ton statue on rollers and you hit even a small dip or a pebble, the friction forces required to keep it moving straight would just be astronomical. The statues would constantly be tipping over, causing immense damage, and it would take massive teams just to right them again.
Exactly. Which brings us to the fascinating rival theory, the one that gained serious traction around 2012. The idea that the Moai walked.
They walked them.
That's the theory. The researchers studying the abandoned figures noticed a very specific pattern. The bases of the Moai left along the roads are D-shaped or slightly concave. They were intentionally shaped to allow a rocking motion.
So the statue walking theory, using ropes attached high up, lets a small team pivot the statue back and forth, like left foot, right foot, inch by inch.
That's it. It's incredibly inefficient by our standards, but it's biomechanically feasible for those massive figures. And crucially, it dramatically reduces the sheer volume of wood required for transportation, which weakens that pure roller collapse link.
So there were experiments to prove this.
There were. The experimental archaeology that demonstrated this involved a replica statue that was successfully walked upright using minimal resources. The key clue, the nugget of knowledge here, is that the shape of the abandoned moai is the evidence. They weren't designed to lie flat on a sledge. They were designed to stand up in rock.
But even if they walked them, the subplot of abandonment still needs resolution. Why did hundreds of statues just freeze mid-journey? And that brings us right back to the devastating theory of ecological collapse.
It does. The sources strongly suggest that even if they walked, they still needed immense amounts of wood for fires, for housing, and critically for building canoes. The island's unique endemic palm species, which once dominated the landscape, was wiped out completely. When the trees vanished, the islanders lost the ability to fish in the deep ocean, which was their main protein source. That led to massive resource competition and eventually warfare.
Wow. It's the ultimate cautionary tale of unsustainable ambition. And the sources offer a few hidden details that prove this wasn't just a simple collapse, but a highly complex spiritual endeavor. Let's talk about the intricate artistry on the backs of the moai.
That detail is just profound. The backs of the statues, which were never meant to be seen once they were placed upright against the ahu. They're often covered in these highly complex petroglyphs, spiral designs, stylized birds, ceremonial markings. The dedication to this hidden artistry suggests the moai were far more than just status symbols. They were vessels for some kind of sacred internal knowledge.
And the pukao, those massive redstone top knots, they sit like hats on top of the heads.
And they're enormous. Some weigh up to 12 tons themselves. Moving the body is one thing. Raising a 12-ton cylinder of red scoria stone onto the head of an already upright 80-ton statue. That is an entirely different technical challenge.
How do they think they did that?
Well, it demands an insight into ancient hoisting mechanisms that remains highly speculative. Most theories point to constructing massive earthen or rock ramps around the statue, dragging the pukao up the ramp, placing it, and then laboriously digging the entire ramp away. The engineering required just to balance that immense weight on the head without snapping the neck is proof of the Rapa Nui people's incredible mechanical intuition.
And this whole mystery is further complicated by the genetic evidence. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth a deep dive here. DNA testing indicates that the Rapa Nui had contact with South American populations centuries before European explorers ever arrived.
Yes, and this fundamentally challenges the narrative of complete hermetic isolation. If they were connected to the wider world, potentially trading or at least sharing information, why didn't they receive a warning or perhaps alternative resources to combat the deforestation?
That raises a really important question. If they had wider cultural contact, then the collapse wasn't a failure of isolation. It was possibly a failure of internal politics. Maybe the competition for prestige expressed through building bigger and heavier statue rivalry, essentially, was just so fierce that it outpaced the island's ability to recover, regardless of any outside contact.
That's a key insight. The monuments themselves may have become the instrument of the civilization's demise, a spiritual or political arms race they just couldn't afford to win.
But the most enduring, the most haunting detail, though, is the gaze of the moai. Almost all of them face inland. They're watching over the villages and the island. Only a tiny handful, just 7 of them, face the sea.
This inland gaze is the ultimate cultural angle. It tells you immediately that the danger, the focus of protection, and the spiritual power were all internal. The ancestors were watching the community, protecting the land, ensuring fertility. They weren't built as watchtowers against invaders.
So, as the environmental catastrophe unfolded and the resource wars began, those colossal ancestors stood silently, watching their own civilization unravel. It forces us to confront this idea of monuments as protectors that ultimately failed or perhaps just witnessed the tragedy. The moai stand today as silent, perpetual witnesses to the limits of human ambition.
Okay, so we travel now from the limits of isolation to the limits of political power. We're moving to the Nile River, specifically to the Temple of Dendur. Today, this beautiful sandstone structure sits in Manhattan, transplanted block by block, sealed inside a climate-controlled glass wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah, it's such an odd sight, a piece of ancient Egypt preserved in New York City, and its origin story is immediately steeped in political intrigue. It was built around 15 BCE, not by an Egyptian pharaoh, but by Petronius, the Roman governor of Egypt, shortly after Emperor Augustus annexed the region.
And here's the core mystery: the dedication. It wasn't built for Jupiter or even the widely celebrated Egyptian gods like Isis or Osiris. It was dedicated to 2 highly localized figures, 2 deified Egyptian brothers, Pitis and Pihor, who had drowned in the Nile.
Okay, so Why would the mighty expansionist Roman Empire expend valuable resources, labor, and architectural effort to honor two obscure, drowned local boys? That seems ridiculously inefficient, even wasteful, unless there was a massive strategic purpose behind it.
And there was. The sources identify the Temple of Dendur as a masterpiece of political calculation and propaganda. The nugget of knowledge here is that Augustus had just secured Egypt, but the populace was volatile. They resented being ruled by foreign powers, especially after the tragic end of Cleopatra.
So Augustus couldn't just crush their gods. That would lead to rebellion. He needed a calculated performance of respect and assimilation, which the Romans were absolute masters of, a process called syncretism.
Exactly. Building a temple to local Egyptian deities, especially two deified heroes known only to the local populace, sent a powerful message. It said, "We, the Romans, acknowledge and honor your ancient traditions, right down to your most local, specific heroes." It was a gesture of cultural inclusion designed entirely to secure political loyalty.
And we have specific, incredible evidence of this strategic thinking carved right into the temple's walls.
We do indeed. If you look at the reliefs, they don't depict Roman soldiers or Roman deities. They show Emperor Augustus himself, dressed as a traditional Egyptian pharaoh wearing the double crown and the ceremonial kilt-making offerings directly to Petis and Pihor.
So he's visually asserting political dominance by becoming the protector of their faith. He wasn't just conquering the land, he was adopting the spiritual mantle of the pharaohs.
It's a fantastic example of using architecture as a political tool. And this temple existed on the Nile for 2,000 years as a testament to Roman maneuvering. Then modern progress threatened to wipe it out entirely.
Right, the Aswan High Dam.
Yes, the construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s was a monumental achievement for Egypt. But it would have created Lake Nasser, submerging countless ancient sites, including Dendur, forever. It initiated one of the largest international rescue missions in archaeological history.
And the U.S. participated heavily in that, and as a gesture of thanks, Egypt gifted the entire Temple of Dendur to the United States.
The logistical undertaking of the relocation is just stunning, and it contrasts ancient resource limits with modern technology so perfectly. Workers meticulously documented and dismantled the temple's 661 sandstone blocks in total, each weighing many tons.
Right.
They were shipped overseas in crates and then had to be reassembled exactly inside a massive climate-controlled room in Manhattan that simulates the conditions of the Nile Valley.
So it became a modern monument to diplomacy and engineering resilience, saving history from the flood. But the relocation fundamentally changed its nature, didn't it? Especially when you consider its original unsettling function.
That's the key psychological angle. The Temple of Dendur wasn't just a place of worship. It was designed as a gateway between worlds, a sacred liminal space.
Liminal space, meaning like a threshold, a place that's not quite here, not quite there.
Precisely. In its original setting on the Nile bank, it was where the living communed with the deified dead. The alcove within was specifically designed for offerings to ensure safe passage through the afterlife for the brothers. The Nile itself, the source of life and the route to the next world, gave the temple its sacred power.
And this sacred power was respected by visitors for millennia. We can actually see that in the layers of historical marks. The walls are covered not just with hieroglyphic prayers, but also with ancient graffiti left by visitors across the centuries. Greek travelers, early Christians, even 19th century explorers and Napoleon soldiers, all leaving their names and comments right next to the images of Augustus the Pharaoh. They all understood they were on hallowed ground.
Now, contrast that sacred function with its reality today. It sits in a hermetically sealed, climate-controlled glass room in a museum. The Nile is thousands of miles away. Millions of tourists pass through, admiring the architecture, taking selfies, but the sacred function is utterly divorced from the stone. No offerings are made. It's an object of observation, not interaction.
So this raises the profound, unsolved question inherent in its relocation. Can you move the sanctity of a liminal space? Does the power of the deified brothers still guard this threshold in New York, trapped behind the glass? Or is it merely an incredibly heavy, elaborate set piece?
It becomes a meditation on context. A temple used for sacred purpose engages the divine. A museum exhibit used for observation is about human curiosity. Dendur reminds us that while modern preservation can save the physical form, it often fundamentally destroys the spiritual, active purpose of the monument. It's a beautifully preserved ghost of a gateway.
Let's move now from the controlled environment of the Met and the ancient banks of the Nile to the rolling hills of southern Ohio. This is where we find the most magnificent and confounding earthwork in North America, the Serpent Mound.
This is a truly spectacular piece of ancient engineering. It's It's a massive earthen serpent, winding and undulating for 1,348 feet along a plateau. It's so huge that if you're walking on the ground, it barely even registers, just gentle rises and dips in the earth.
But the true form emerges when you view it from above. It's a massive snake with a triple coil near its tail, moving toward an oval shape at its head. The serpent seems to be either swallowing an egg, a pearl, or maybe the sun itself. It's an unmistakable, deliberate message carved into the earth.
And the primary intractable mystery here is its age, which is complicated by contradictory dating. This isn't a simple matter of digging up artifacts. The mound itself is a pure geological puzzle, constructed entirely of earth and clay.
Right. So we have significant evidence suggesting it was built around 1070 CE. This timeline attributes it to the Fort Ancient culture, a group living closer to the historical period known to European settlers. And the dating comes from organic material found near the base.
However, other highly compelling radiocarbon research suggests a much older date, potentially 300 BCE, and that would place its creation squarely with the earlier monumental Adena culture. Archaeologists have conflicting evidence supporting both timelines, creating a genuine scientific dispute that just has not been resolved.
The crucial detail, and this is what makes it so hard, is that the mound contains virtually no artifacts or burials associated with its construction. This total lack of a material culture footprint means we can't say definitively the people who built this used these tools and buried their dead here. It's just an empty vessel, a cipher carved into the planet, and that makes assigning credit nearly impossible.
So this forces us to rely entirely on its form, and most importantly, its orientation. And that is where the Serpent Mound becomes truly mesmerizing. Its astronomical precision is the defining nugget of knowledge.
This wasn't built randomly. The geometry is just too specific. If you stand at the apex of the serpent's head, you can align it directly to the summer solstice sunset. And furthermore, the coils and curves of the serpent's body align perfectly with the equinoxes and potentially with the specific position of the major lunar standstills.
So what does this alignment suggest? I mean, was it a massive astronomical clock? A sophisticated calendar used to predict planting, harvesting, and ceremonial cycles? Or maybe it was a celestial map, a representation of the constellation Draco or some other powerful sky being witnessed by ancient astronomers.
The sources suggest the astronomical connections marry the earthwork to the cycles of time, making it functional. But if we follow the cultural angle, it may have been more than functional. It may have been a profound spiritual boundary marker.
And this leads us to the chilling aha moment of modern geological science. Recent surveys confirm that the Serpent Mound is not just sitting on a random plateau. It sits atop a crypto-explosion structure.
A crypto-explosion structure. Okay, let's break that down for everyone listening. This is essentially the scar left by an ancient massive meteorite impact long hidden underground.
Exactly. The evidence includes geological anomalies like shatter cones, these unique conical fracture patterns in the rock, and traces of shocked quartz, which only forms under the extreme pressures of an impact event. It is definitive. The plateau the serpent coils upon is the rim of an ancient crater.
Okay, that connection changes everything. Did the builders, whether they were Adena or Fort Ancient, did they know this? Did they choose this exact spot because they sensed or had oral traditions about a massive cosmic collision that occurred millennia before their time?
The interpretation many scholars favor is that the serpent was deliberately placed there to commemorate a cosmic catastrophe. The serpentine form is often symbolic of regeneration, rebirth, and the cyclical nature of time, the perfect motif for marking an impact event where a piece of the sky fell to Earth.
And this aligns powerfully with indigenous oral traditions in the region that speak of horned serpents, or the Great Serpent, often symbolizing the boundary between the celestial world and the terrestrial realm. If the mound is built on an impact zone, it literally marks the place where the two worlds violently met.
It forces us to view the mound not just as a calendar, but potentially as a trauma memorial, a colossal, enduring marking of an event of immense scale that was passed down through generations until it was literally carved into the surviving scar of the Earth.
It is an absolute miracle that this monumental piece of engineering survived at all. We have to share the preservation anecdote about Frederick Putnam in the 1880s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
By the late 19th century, the mound was sitting on privately held farmland, and farmers who were unaware of its immense historical value were preparing to plow it under for cultivation. It was only due to Putnam, a passionate archaeologist from Harvard, that it was saved.
Putnam recognized the mound's profound significance immediately, but he couldn't afford to buy the land. So he launched one of America's first crowd-funded preservation efforts, raising money from the public and civic organizations just to purchase the land and protect the earthwork.
Think about the irony there. The existence of this profound astronomical 1,300-foot cosmic calendar, built with stunning precision possibly 2 millennia ago, was saved by public donations and a passionate archaeologist. And even Putnam, the man who saved it for posterity, couldn't solve the fundamental question of the mound's purpose or origin. It remains a magnificent, beautifully posed question mark in the American landscape, continuing to defy definitive dating. We transition now from physical monuments, whether they be stone, earth, or transplanted architecture, to the ultimate monument of loss, the Library of Alexandria. This structure haunts the global imagination not because of what we see, but because of the immeasurable void left by its absence.
This wasn't just a library in the modern sense, it was the ultimate research institution of the ancient world. It was founded around 300 BCE by Ptolemy I, and the ambition was just audacious and totalizing. The goal was to acquire and hold all human knowledge, every scroll, every text, every fragment of wisdom from every culture known to man.
The sources confirm its scale was staggering. At its zenith, it may have contained anywhere from 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. This was the centralized database, the internet, of the ancient world. It employed hundreds of scholars, librarians, and copyists who meticulously translated, indexed, and maintained this vast collection of human thought.
And then it vanished. For centuries, the popular legend has centered on a single catastrophic blaze, usually pinned on one historical figure, often Julius Caesar. But the painful truth, the historical nugget we must extract, is that its destruction was far slower and much more tragic.
Yes, the destruction was not a natural disaster or a single event. It was a slow, deliberate act of cultural attrition across multiple centuries. It was, as some sources suggest, knowledge murdered slowly.
So let's trace this devastating timeline of loss, because it reveals a pattern of political and religious antagonism toward knowledge. It starts small, with Caesar in 48 BCE.
Right. During Caesar's siege of Alexandria, his fleet set fire to the harbor. And while this wasn't an intentional attack on the library itself, the sources suggest that massive warehouses storing newly acquired scrolls, or scrolls awaiting cataloging, were destroyed. It was a major accidental blow that depleted the collection, but the main intellectual heart of the library survived.
The next major blow came centuries later, in 391 CE. By this time, the library had suffered other minor losses, but the intellectual spirit was still there.
Well, in 391 CE, under the increasing influence of Christianity, Emperor Theodosius ordered the destruction of pagan temples. This led to Christian zealots destroying the Temple of Serapis, which housed the smaller but equally vital daughter library. This was a deliberate act of religious cleansing, destroying pagan wisdom alongside the idols.
And finally, the Arab conquest in 642 CE often gets blamed.
Yes, the Arab conquest sealed its final fate. But while historical accounts vary wildly, some claiming the caliph ordered the scrolls burned because they either contradicted or duplicated the Quran, the reality is that by 642 CE, the vast majority of the original collection had already been lost. It was lost due to sustained political neglect, religious zealotry, and decay. The building was already an intellectual shadow of its former self.
The insight here is so crucial. The single-fire myth persists because it's neat and it's simple. It allows us to blame one person. But the reality that the library was slowly choked and destroyed over 700 years by the successive forces of war, religious intolerance, and neglect is far more chilling, and it holds much greater resonance for how knowledge is treated today.
And that leads us to the enduring nightmare, the catalog of loss. We will never truly know the full extent of what was contained within those walls, but the estimates are terrifying.
Terrifying is the right word. Many scholars believe that up to 90% of classical literature vanished with the library. Think about that. The entire scope of the ancient world, its comedy, its history, its science, and its philosophy, all filtered down to us through what little survived.
Let's make that loss tangible for you. Consider Sophocles, one of the 3 great Greek tragedians. We have only 7 of his complete plays today, masterpieces like Oedipus Rex. The sources confirm he wrote 123 plays, 116 masterpieces of human drama and psychology, gone forever. We're reading only the footnotes of a genius.
Or take science. The mathematician and chief librarian Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy. He used only basic geometry, shadow measurements in different cities, and known distances. His methodologies and his precise calculations, they disappeared. We had to wait until the modern era to rediscover that fundamental fact about our own planet, knowledge that was already cataloged in 240 BCE.
And the loss of engineering secrets is just as profound. Consider the scrolls detailing the composition of Greek fire, that powerful incendiary weapon used by the Byzantines. We know it could burn on water and was nearly impossible to extinguish, but the formula was so sensitive that it was lost entirely. Or the knowledge of Roman concrete, which allowed structures like the Pantheon to stand today, 2 millennia later, often outlasting our modern concrete compositions.
The sheer volume of missing knowledge. Lost works of Archimedes, complete histories of Rome, lost medical treatises that could have advanced medicine by centuries. It forces us to realize that the Dark Ages weren't just a period of stagnation, they were, in part, a forced reset button pressed by cultural violence.
And the final tragedy is the fate of the scholars who protected that knowledge. Ancient sources refer to the philosopher Theon, who watched the destruction of the daughter library in 391 CE.
And Theon's daughter was Hypatia. She stands as one of the last great scholars of Alexandria. She excelled in mathematics, astronomy, and Neoplatonist philosophy, and she worked tirelessly to preserve and disseminate the remaining texts.
And her brutal murder in 415 CE, dragged from her chariot and torn apart by a Christian mob inflamed by political and religious rivalry, it symbolizes the final, absolute demise of the Alexandrian intellectual spirit. It wasn't just the parchment that was destroyed, it was the people who held the knowledge, the human continuity that makes learning possible.
So it's not just a story of fire, it's a story of cultural murder, and the physical mystery persists today. The library building itself remains undiscovered, buried beneath the modern, impossibly dense city of Alexandria.
Excavation is nearly impossible, but divers occasionally find columns, barnacle-covered fragments of limestone and granite in the harbor, whispered secrets of what lies beneath the streets.
The ultimate modern echo is the new Bibliotheca Alexandrina, which opened in 2002 near the presumed original site. It's a massive modern library built on a historical graveyard of knowledge, a monument to hope, but also perpetual mourning for the 90% that is forever lost. This journey has taken us through 4 monumental paradoxes. The Moai, whose engineering brilliance was matched only by the ecological tragedy of their civilization. The Temple of Dendur, repurposed from a sacred liminal gateway into a masterpiece of Roman political propaganda. The Serpent Mound, a cosmic calendar built over the ancient scar of a meteorite impact. And the Library of Alexandria, the ghost of all the knowledge we collectively lost.
If we synthesize these 4 enigmas, they consistently point to one thing: the persistence of the unsolvable challenges our modern hubris. We look at the past, assume technological superiority, and then realize people with no metal tools were moving 80-ton statues, and people with no computers were mapping solar and lunar standstills with phenomenal accuracy.
And the most profound insight for me is that the tragedy so often stems from cultural forces, not just technical limits. The Rapa Nui might have collapsed due to internal rivalry expressed through statues. Dendur's purpose was redefined by political conquest, and the Library of Alexandria was destroyed not by nature, but by deliberate antagonism toward intellectual curiosity.
These mysteries persist precisely because they force us to confront what we don't know. They represent the boundaries of forgotten human ingenuity. How did they raise the Pukao? What was the Serpent Mound commemorating? What are the other 116 Sophocles plays about? These monuments are doors we are desperately trying to reopen.
They compel us to ask not just what happened, but what the people of the past knew that has been entirely forgotten or violently erased. The realization that our current understanding of history is based on what survived, not necessarily what was best, is deeply unsettling.
And consider the immediate application of that knowledge. The next time you encounter a piece of history, understand that its survival may be completely arbitrary. Its existence today is a miracle of preservation against the forces of time and human conflict.
Absolutely. The enduring question echoing across millennia is, what did you know that we've forgotten? And more importantly, how do we ensure that the knowledge we have today doesn't suffer the same slow, deliberate murder that happened in Alexandria? That's the challenge these silent monuments leave us with.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the monumental mysteries that continue to define the limits of the human story.